Hey guys, next video for Unit 3 today. I forgot at the end of the video yesterday there was one more thing about First Amendment, just limiting speech. Just a simple reminder that limitations on freedom of speech can include hate speech, obscenities, things like that. That's why we're censoring music on the radio or TV and things like that. Can't say things that might cause harm to people, like we talked about with Shank versus United States. So just do keep in mind that there are times that freedoms of speech can be limited. But today we're going to do Eighth Amendment, Big Idea 3, get into some of the different things in the 14th Amendment, because remember, Amendments 1 and 14 are probably the two most important for you to know. Just really simple. One thing on the Eighth Amendment that can come up sometimes is cruel and unusual punishment. There's a Supreme Court case, Gregg versus Georgia. It's not likely to be on your exam, but just in case, it basically reaffirms the federal government's uses of the death penalty. So there's a challenge saying that cruel and unusual punishment. You might remember early in the year we did a case study about the death penalty in the United States. That basically that killing people is cruel and unusual punishment. They try to bring that up to the Supreme Court, but the court ruled that the federal government can use the death penalty as a punishment for severe crimes. But getting into the big topic today, Big Idea 3, protections of the Bill of Rights have been selectively incorporated by way of the 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause to prevent state infringement of basic liberties. Okay. 14th Amendment, you have to think about the time period that this is put in place, right? Where during Reconstruction, slaves have been freed. The 14th Amendment, one of the big things that you hear about, gives citizenship to African Americans, but it's also that equal protection under the law is a big part of it for this class. So what happens is states, especially in the South, are obviously trying to limit those freedoms given to citizens by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So the Due Process Clause is trying to prevent state infringement on basic liberties for African Americans initially, but now it's kind of been an all-encompassing thing for all people. So just some vocab to clean up here. Selective incorporation is part by part application of the Bill of Rights to state and local governments through court decisions. So basically saying that you can't just pick and choose who's going to get rights, or that you're going to have this right in Buffalo, but you're not going to have this right in Niagara Falls, right? That they're kind of all encompassing. Due process, citizens accused of crimes are given fair treatment throughout the entire criminal process from arrest through trial. Talked about that a lot this year. We talked about the amendments due process clause, due process under the law, and then equal protection. It's a clause in the 14th Amendment that guarantees all citizens are to receive equal protection under the law. Okay, so when we talk about kind of the biggest part of the 14th Amendment that you need to know for this class, it's definitely this equal protection clause. It's been interpreted very, very broadly. So the 14th Amendment gets used a lot in Supreme Court cases that might not even directly relate to the 14th Amendment when we first think about it, because they bring up this equal protection clause. Okay. So I have a couple of Supreme Court cases that are going to be examples of selective incorporation, due process, and equal protection to try to help us better understand them that go as the sheet moves on. So selective incorporation. You might remember watching a video about this in class, McDonald versus Chicago. It's basically a Supreme Court case about the Second Amendment. In 2008, the Supreme Court ruled in a previous case, Heller versus the District of Columbia, that Washington, D.C.'s ban on weapons was unconstitutional, that people did have the right to bear arms, even if they weren't in the militia or whatever, as worded in the Second Amendment itself. So Chicago had a handgun ban. McDonald actually was an elderly gentleman who wanted to own a handgun because he believed that his neighborhood wasn't safe and he wanted to protect himself with it. So this case goes to Supreme Court, and basically the Supreme Court is going to rule that the Second Amendment is selectively incorporated into state and local governments, so that they can take that Second Amendment, that federal law, and incorporate it into all local and state laws to preserve that right to bear arms at every level of government. Okay. A lot of people get this case confused. They don't quite understand what's really going on there. So just quite simply, just remember, Chicago tried to ban handguns. It didn't work. The Supreme Court ruled that the federal government has the authority to incorporate the Second Amendment into all state and local governments. All right. Moving on a little bit here. Due process, infringing upon individual rights. You might remember discussions of the Patriot Act after 9/11. It's legislation passed that basically was supposed to improve law enforcement's ability to protect against terrorism, but there's issues with both the First and Fourth Amendment, people's right to privacy and things like that. The Patriot Act, they're tapping into people's phones, listening to phone calls, checking emails without people's permission, right, without a warrant to search really people's personal property. So eventually that's going to be ruled unconstitutional. In 2015, the USA Freedoms Act, this is one that we didn't talk about, but it basically restricts collection of telephone data used to, on U.S. citizens. So it's basically something to help protect people's privacies. Basically, if you think about it, if you go online or if you sign up for something, a lot of times your phone number just magically gets given to a whole bunch of different services and people are emailing you and calling you and things like that. This was an attempt to limit that. So it's interesting when we talk about the due process clause because a lot of times the Supreme Court rules in favor of states' power to restrict individual liberties. If speech can kind of limit public safety or poses like a threat of imminent danger, things like that. But when we talk about ultimately these constitutional principles in the First, Fourth, and 14th Amendments, the Supreme Court's usually more likely than not going to rule in favor of the citizen, which is why when you see the Patriot Act gets ruled unconstitutional because it is infringing on people's First and Fourth Amendment rights. Okay, so keep that in mind. Also, just something simple, but when we talk about the Fourth Amendment, protects you against illegal search and seizure. The Supreme Court's incorporated cell phones into that, so internet, anything like emails, stuff like that. You need a warrant to search through somebody's cell phone data. You need a warrant to search through somebody's internet search history. You need a warrant to look at somebody's emails. All right, so it's kind of another example of the Constitution being expanded into basically more modern times. All right. Couple other court cases, rights to the accused. We've talked about both of these cases a little bit already, but Miranda versus Arizona, you might remember that term Miranda rights that we say now. It's named after this case. So Miranda's arrested, basically questioned without his consent, ends up confessing to a crime that he actually was guilty of. But basically, the Supreme Court rules that his due process rights were violated and that arrested suspects from this point on needed to basically be informed of their rights. And that's why it gets called Miranda rights. So you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to an attorney, all those types of things. And you can see the constitutional principles there. It's due process, the Fifth Amendment, Sixth Amendment, 14th Amendment, all of those things are fit and put in place there. Gideon versus Wainwright. Gideon's arrested for breaking into a pool hall. He wasn't given a lawyer and he couldn't afford a lawyer. So he's sentenced to 5 years in prison, but he appeals. The Supreme Court selectively incorporates the Sixth Amendment's right to counsel, basically saying that the state did not have a right to sentence him to 5 years in prison, find him guilty because he was not given the right to an attorney. That Sixth Amendment right to counsel is not something that is solely given to federal cases. It's incorporated into state and local governments as well. All right, so at any time, a citizen of the United States has the right to have an attorney present in any courtroom, whether or not they can afford it or not. Please make sure you read through these special notes too, guys. I try not to spend tons of time on everything because I know that it's hard enough to stay focused, and I appreciate those of you that are watching these videos. But just look through those things. There's some important info there. I'm just trying to get the videos and keep them as short as possible. One last term that we haven't talked about in class is the exclusionary rule. And when we talk about the exclusionary rule, it's basically a weird incorporation of the Fourth Amendment that basically means that evidence obtained illegally by law enforcement cannot be admitted to at a trial. So, for example, if a police officer came to my house and they had a warrant to search my house because they believed that I had an illegal weapon or an illegal firearm in my house, or they believed that I had drugs in my house. And then when they walk into my house and they're, doing their search, they find that I have something else that I wasn't supposed to have, but it's not pertinent to their warrant. Whatever they found cannot be used against me in court. That evidence would not be allowed to have in the trial. It's excluded, hence the name exclusionary, from the trial because their warrant did not have that information pertinent to it. So if you're looking for an example of the exclusionary rule, the court case Mapp versus Ohio is a good one. police officers show up, they show a woman a piece of paper that she tries to grab from them, and there's a scuffle, and they never find that paper again. So they basically search her house without a real warrant. Anything that they find is considered to be found illegal and cannot be used in court. Supreme Court privacy cases, we've talked a little bit about these. We had our moot court for Roe versus Wade, so you guys should know this already, but Roe versus Wade basically says that a woman has the right to terminate a pregnancy. It's a right of privacy, that shouldn't be anybody else's business but hers. Fourth Amendment, Ninth Amendment, and 14th Amendment due process all put in place there. So big thing that I want you to remember from today's video, guys, is simply just that the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, and then also the 14th Amendment with its sort of due process clause and things like that. When we talk about the rights of citizens, the rights of people, the Supreme Court is usually going to act to protect those civil rights and civil liberties in any way. So when we talk about this unit, we talk about civil liberties, civil rights. It's really those things that we're covering, those things that we're talking about. The court cases are going to be really important to tie in your examples with this. So what I expect for you to possibly see on your exam would be where you're asked, please explain an example of time where the 14th Amendment was brought up as a constitutional principle, and you need to be able to state a court case that incorporates it, explain how it works, things like that. So hopefully we should be able to do that. We've been doing it all year. I'll stop there. I'll post a video for Big Idea 4 tomorrow, and I'll do 5 and 6 on Saturday. Have a good day, guys. Take care.